start with your star points. You can go ahead and copy what I have down. We're going to go with a lot less and fewer. Who's not here?
What if we don't have
Keep going, just 10 past.
Just strike one. A lot.
I didn't see it.
Less. And fewer.
Who's not here? Everybody here?
Gabby.
Gabby's not here?
Gabby's right here. Oh, never mind.
Oh. Alright, we are going to do 3 star point words today, 2 star point words tomorrow, and we will be using them in a writing journal on Thursday, so they're important. Okay, so we're going to look at numbers of things today, a lot, less, and fewer. I expect after this one that I never see the wrong version of a lot ever again. Never, ever, never, ever, never, never. Okay, a lot, A space L-O-T. Okay, the proof for a lot is a whole lot. A whole lot.
Which hole is it?
With a W.
You know. I mean.
Okay, so there was a lot of food at the party. Make sure that that space is visible. When we use a star point word, if you would like all of the points in your writing journal, make sure that you are underlining to show that you know which one you are using and that you are using the correct one. Put the proof above in parentheses. So in this case, you write a whole lot. We can make sure that this is correct by saying there was a whole lot of food at the party. All right. I have something delightful for you about a lot. If you didn't get it, I'll put that back up. Just a minute. All right, so, come on, load. All right, a lot means very many, very much. That's with a space. A-L-L-O-T is also a lot, but that would be like if I allotted something to you, if I'm going to divide or share. We don't use that one as often. Okay, but an a lot with no space means you need to brush up on your grammar and vocabulary skills. This is an a lot monster. If you leave no space in between the word a and lot, you are giving me an a lot monster. Let's let Spider-Man explain it to us. I care about this a lot. I care about this a lot. A lot. Spidey says, a lot is an imaginary creature and a grammar abomination. A lot, with a space between the a and the lot, is the correct form. So here are some delightful a lots.
Thanks, Spidey. I
like this a lot more. A lot is very hard to chew.
Really weird.
Yeah, I know that one's awkward. A lot is not a word. You don't write a little, a bunch, a cantaloupe, a pork chop, so don't write a lot.
I do that. What about what we have to know? I can't
A lot of straw. A lot more dangerous, baby. Less dangerous. So, next time you write a lot with no spaces, you're giving me an a lot monster, no a lot monsters in your paper. Only description of how much. All right, there you go. The next one we're going to look at is less and fewer, and you may not have ever been taught the rules between less and fewer, but there's actually a rule for when you use less versus when you use fewer, okay? The proof on this first one is kind of funky, so just roll with me, and I'll show you what to actually put in the parentheses above, but you say, can you count it? No. Okay? Less means it is uncountable. Okay, so that's actually what you're going to put in your parentheses above. It's uncountable. So, my sentence example here is we have less furniture than we used to. So I'm going to underline my star point word, and above it in my parentheses, I'm going to write uncountable. Okay, when we talk this one out, it's kind of funky. So listen, can you count furniture?
Yes.
Can I say I have one furniture? I have two furnitures? I got 4 furnitures.
Yeah.
No, I can't say that. That's not right. Furniture is already collective, so we don't count it. It's already the collective. I could say I have 1 chair or 2 chairs, but we cannot count furniture. So that's the case in which you would use less. Okay? When it's countable, that's when you use fewer. So if instead of saying furniture, if I said chairs, we have fewer chairs than we used to. Okay, so I underline fewer, and above it I would write it's countable. Because I could say I have 1 chair, 2 chair, 3 chair, 4. But I would not say I have 1 furnitures, 2 furnitures. So that's the difference between less and fewer. Another collective word would be like food, right? You wouldn't say I got 1 foods, 2 foods, 3 foods. That doesn't make sense. I have 1 apple, okay, so I have fewer apples, but I have less food. Okay, so if it's collective, it's uncountable, it's less, and fewer is for when you actually have 1. I know that's weird because you probably never heard that before, but try to take that in. We're going to be proving all of these in our writing journal entry that we do on Thursday. Okay, you can put your notebooks away, get out your To Kill a Mockingbird notes. Get out your copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. We're going to pick up where we did yesterday.
Are you going to read it to us or you think
I'm going to read it to you. Y'all are so sweet. Fine. And remember, it is in your best interest to move quickly through getting your stuff out because tomorrow at the end of class we will need to be through end of chapter 3, and if we are not done with chapter 3 in class, then you'll have to read it outside.
Hey, last class.
If they're left it, you can just throw it up here. Geniuses.
Oh, no.
Okay, we're on page 14.
Whoa.
Page 14, 1-4, 14, 1-4.
Oh, yeah, there's much. I thought it was 3 days. Good job.
Charger.
My headphones still there?
No, that's all that's here.
Alright.
Okay, 1-4, 14, page 14.
What are the words?
What? Where Boo could not live forever on the bounty of the county. Middle of the page, the next line is going to be nobody. Paragraph that starts nobody.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, the way that we're going to do this, I'm going to finish all of chapter 1, and then we'll pause and we'll take the notes. There's only 2 left, and honestly, you could fill them in as we go. And then we'll talk about chapter 1 if you have any questions, and then we'll go on and finish chapter 2. We should be good time-wise. Okay? Make sure that you're following along, that you're reading, that you're taking good quality notes, all of that jazz. All right. When we last left, remember that Boo had been locked up in the courthouse basement, right? Because he's been running around with all the bad guys. Okay? And Mr. Radley is taking responsibility for him, is going to keep him at home, right, and not send him to the state school. Okay? So we're still involved in this urban legend of Boo Radley. Nobody knew what form of intimidation Mr. Radley employed to keep Boo out of sight, but Jim figured that Mr. Radley kept him chained to the bed most of the time. Atticus said no, it wasn't the sort of thing, but there were other ways of making people into ghosts. My memory came alive to see Mrs. Radley occasionally open the front door, walk to the edge of the porch, and pour water on her canvas. But every day Jim and I would see Mr. Radley walking to and from town. He was a thin, leathery man with colorless eyes, so colorless they did not reflect light. His cheekbones were sharp and his mouth was wide, with a thin upper lip and a full lower lip. Mrs. Stephanie Crawford said he was so upright he took the word of God as his only law, and we believed her because Mr. Radley's posture was ramrod straight. He never spoke to us. When he passed, we would look at the ground and say, "Good morning, sir," and he would cough in reply. Mr. Radley's elder son lived in Pensacola. He came home at Christmas, and he's one of the few persons we ever saw enter or leave the place. From the day Mr. Radley took Arthur home, people said the house died. But there came a time when Atticus told us he'd wear us out if we made any noise in the yard, and commissioned Calpurnia to serve in his absence. if she heard a sound out of us. Mr. Radley was dying. He took his time about it. Wooden sawhorses blocked the road at each end of the Radley lot. Straw was put down on the sidewalk. Traffic was diverted to the back street. Dr. Reynolds parked his car in front of our house and walked to the Radleys every time he called. Jim and I crept around the yard for days. At last, the sawhorses were taken away, and we stood watching from the front porch when Mr. Radley made his final journey past our house. "There goes the meanest man ever God blew breath into," murmured Calpurnia. She spat meditatively into the yard. We looked at her in surprise, for Calpurnia rarely commented on the ways of white people. The neighborhood thought that when Mr. Radley went under, Boo would come out, but it had another thing coming. Boo's elder brother returned from Pensacola and took Mr. Radley's place. Only difference between him and his father was their ages. And Jim said Mr. Nathan Radley bought cotton too. Mr. Nathan would speak to us, however, when we said good morning, and sometimes we saw him coming from town with a magazine in his hand. The more we told Dill about the Radleys, the more he wanted to know. The longer he would stand hugging the light pole on the corner, the more he would wonder. "Wonder what he does in there," he would murmur. "Looks like he'd just stick his head out the door." Jim said, "He goes out all right when it's pitch dark. Miss Stephanie Crawford said she woke up in the middle of the night one time and saw him looking straight through the window at her. Said his head was like a skull looking at her. Ain't you ever waked up at night and heard him, Dill? He walks like this." Jim slid his feet through the gravel. "Why do you think Miss Rachel locks up so tight at night? I've seen his tracks in our backyard many a morning, and one night I heard him scratching on the back screen. But he was gone time Atticus got there." "Wonder what he looks like," said Dill. Jim gave a reasonable description of Boo. Boo was about 6.5 feet tall, judging from his tracks. He dined on raw squirrels and any cats he could catch. That's why his hands were blood-stained. If you ate an animal raw, you could never wash the blood off. There was a long, jagged scar that ran across his face. What teeth he had were yellow and rotten. His eyes popped. He drooled most of the time. "Let's try to make him come out," said Dill. "I'd like to see what he looks like." Jim said if Dill wanted to get himself killed, all he had to do was go up and knock on the front door. Our first raid came to pass only because Dill bet Jim the gray ghost against 2 Tom Swifts that Jim wouldn't get any further than the Radley gate. In all his life, Jim had never declined a dare. Jim thought about it for 3 days. I suppose he loved honor more than his head, for Dill wore him down easily. "You're scared," Dill said the first day. "Ain't scared, just respectful," Jim said. The next day, Dill said, "You're too scared to even put your big toe in the front yard." Jim said he reckoned he wasn't. He'd pass the Radley place every school day of his life. "Always running," I said. But Dill got him the 3rd day when he told Jim that folks in Meridian certainly weren't as afraid as the folks in Maycomb. He'd never seen such scaredy folks as the ones in Maycomb. This was enough to make Jim march to the corner where he stepped and leaned on the light pole, watching the gate hanging crazily on its homemade hinge. "I hope you've got it through your head that he'll kill each and every one, Dill Harris," said Jim. When we joined him, "Don't blame me when he gouges your eyes out. You started it, remember?" "You're still scared," murmured Dill patiently. Jim wanted Dill to know once and for all that he wasn't scared of anything. "It's just that I can't think of a way to make him come out without him getting us." Besides, Jim had his little sister to think of. When he said that, I knew he was afraid. Jim had his little sister to think of the time I dared him to jump off the top of the house. "If I got killed, what would become of you?" he asked. Then he jumped, landed unhurt, and his sense of responsibility left him until confronted by the Radley place. "You gonna run out on a dare?" asked Dill. "If you are, then—" "Dill, you have to think about these things," Jim said. "Let me think a minute. Sort of like making a turtle come out." "How's that?" asked Dill. "Strike a match under him. I told Jim if he set fire to the Radley house, I was going to tell Atticus on him." Dill said striking a match under a turtle was hateful. "Ain't hateful, just persuades him, not like you're going to chunk him in the fire," Jim growled. "How do you know a match don't hurt him? Turtles can't feel, stupid," said Jim. "Were you ever a turtle, huh?" "My stars, Dill. Now let me think. Reckon we can rock him." Jim stood and thought so long that Dill made a mild concession. "Won't say you ran on a dare, and I'll swap you the gray ghost if you want to just go up and touch the house." Jim brightened. "Touch the house? That all?" Dill nodded. "Sure that's all now? I don't want you hollering something different the minute I get back." "Yeah, that's all," said Dill. He'll probably come out after you when he sees you in the yard. Then Scout and me'll jump on him and hold him down till we can tell him we ain't gonna hurt him. We left the corner across the side street that ran in front of the Radley house and stopped at the gate. Well, go on, said Dill. Scout and me's right behind you. I'm going, said Jim. Don't hurry me. He walked to the corner lot, then back again, studying the simple terrain as if deciding how best to effect an entry, frowning and scratching his head. Then I sneered at him. Jim threw open the gate, sped to the side of the house, slapped it with his palm, and ran back past us, not waiting to see if his foray was successful. Dill and I followed on his heels. Safely on our porch, panting and out of breath, we looked back. The old house was the same, droopy and sick. But as we stared down the street, we thought we saw an inside shutter move. Flick. A tiny, almost invisible movement, and the house went still. Alright, that's the end of chapter 1, so let's make sure we have all the notes filled in for chapter 1. Page 13 you should have had from yesterday, where Boo does what with scissors? Stabs his father. Okay, page 15. What major event happens on page 15? Mr. Radley died. Mr. Radley died. And then that last chunk there, 18 and 19, what is it that Dill dares Jim to do? Touch the Radley house. Alright, we're going to move on to chapter 2. In chapter 2, the notes are fairly short. So as we're reading, you could just fill those in, and if you miss one as we go, we'll go back after and make sure that you've got everything you need. The last box on chapter 2 should be labeled, the 26 and 28 should be labeled flashback. Do you see that? Okay, so make sure when you're on those that it's the flashback of the chapter. Alright, chapter 2 starts on the top of page 20. Okay, and we've had a little bit of a time lapse. You'll see that it doesn't pick up right after some time has passed. Alright, Dill left us early in September to return to Meridian. We saw him off on the 5 o'clock bus, and I was miserable without him until it occurred to me that I would be starting school in a week. I never looked forward more to anything in my life. Hours of wintertime had found me in the treehouse, looking over the schoolyard, spying on the multitudes of children through the 2-power telescope Jim had given me, learning their games, following Jim's red jacket through the wriggling circles of Blind Man's Buff, and secretly sharing in their misfortunes and minor victories. I longed to join them. Jim condescended to take me to school the first day, a job usually done by one's parents, but Atticus had said Jim would be delighted to show me where my room was. I think some money changed hands in this transaction, for as we trotted around the corner past the Radley place, I heard an unfamiliar jingle in Jim's pocket. When we slowed to a walk at the edge of the schoolyard, Jim was careful to explain that during school hours, I was not to bother him, was not to approach him with a request to enact a chapter of Tarzan and the Ant-Men, to embarrass him with references to his private life, or to tag behind him at recess and to noon. I was to stick with the first grade, and he would stick with the 5th. In short, I was to leave him alone. You mean we can't play anymore? I asked. Do like we always do at home, he said. But you'll see, school's different. It certainly was. Before the first morning was over, Miss Caroline Fisher, our teacher, hauled me up to the front of the room, patted the palm of my hand with a ruler, then made me stand in the corner until noon. Miss Caroline was no more than 21. She had bright auburn hair, pink cheeks, and wore crimson fingernail polish. She also wore high-heeled pumps and a red and white striped dress. She looked and smelled like a peppermint drop. She boarded across the street, one door down from us, in Miss Maudie Atkinson's upstairs front room. And when Miss Maudie introduced her to us, Jim was in a haze for days. Miss Caroline printed her name on the blackboard and said, "This says I am Miss Caroline Fisher. I am from North Alabama, from Winston County." The class murmured apprehensively, should she prove to harbor her share of the peculiarities indigenous to that region. When Alabama seceded from the Union on January 11, 1861, Winston County seceded from Alabama, and every child in Macomb County knew it. North Alabama was full of liquor interests, big mules, steel companies, Republicans, professors, and other persons of no background. Miss Caroline began the day by reading us a story about cats. Cats had long conversations with one another. They wore cunning little clothes and lived in a warm house beneath a kitchen stove. By the time Mrs. Cat called the drugstore for an order of chocolate malted mice, the class was wriggling like a bucket full of catawba worms. Miss Caroline seemed unaware that the ragged, denim-shirted, flour-sack-skirted first grade, most of whom had chopped cotton and fed hogs from the time they were able to walk, were immune to imaginative literature. Miss Caroline came to the end of the story and said, "Oh my, wasn't that nice?" Then she went to the blackboard and printed the alphabet in enormous square capitals, turned to the class and asked, "Does anybody know what these are?" Everybody did. Most of the first grade had failed it last year. I suppose she chose me because she knew my name. And as I read the alphabet, a faint line appeared between her eyebrows. And after making me read most of my first reader, the stock market quotations from the Mobile Register aloud, she discovered that I was literate and looked at me with more than faint distaste. Miss Caroline told me to tell my father not to teach me anymore. It would interfere with my reading. "Teach me?" I said in surprise. "He hadn't taught me anything, Miss Caroline. Atticus ain't got time to teach me anything." I added when Miss Caroline smiled and shook her head, "Why, he's so tired at night he just sits in the living room and reads." "If he didn't teach you, who did?" Miss Caroline asked good-naturedly. "Somebody did. You weren't born reading the Mobile Register." "Jim says I was. He read in a book where I was really a bullfinch instead of finch. Says my name's really Jean Louise Bullfinch and that I got swapped when I was born. And I'm really a..." Miss Caroline apparently thought I was lying. "Let's not let our imaginations run away with us, dear," she said. "Now you tell your father not to teach you anymore. It's best to begin reading with a fresh mind. You tell him I'll take over here from here and try to undo the damage." "Ma'am?" "Your father does not know how to teach. You can have a seat now." I mumbled that I was sorry and retired meditating upon my crime. I never deliberately learned to read, but somehow I'd been wallowing illicitly in the daily papers. In the long hours of church, was it then that I learned? I could not remember not being able to read hymns. Now that I was compelled to think about it, reading was something that just came to me. I was learning to fasten the seat of my union suit without looking around, or achieving 2 bows from a snarl of shoelaces. I could not remember when the lines of Atticus's moving finger separated into words. I had stared at them all the evenings in my memory, listening to the news of the day, bills to be enacted into laws, the diary of Lorenzo Dow, anything Atticus happened to be reading when I crawled into his lap every night, until I feared I would lose it. I had never loved to read. One does not love breathing. I knew I had annoyed Miss Caroline, so I let well enough alone and stared out the window until recess, when Jim kept me from a covey of first graders in the schoolyard. He asked how I was getting along, and I told him. If I didn't have to stay, I'd leave. "Jim, that damn lady says Atticus has been teaching me to read, and for him to stop it." "Don't worry, Scout," Jim comforted me. "Our teacher says Miss Caroline's introducing a new way of teaching. She learned about it in college. It'll be in all the grades soon. You don't have to learn much out of books that way. It's like if you want to learn about cows, you go milk one, see?" "Yeah, Jim, but I don't want to study cows." "Sure you do. You have to know about cows. They're a big part of life in Macomb County." I contented myself with asking Jim if he'd lost his mind. "I'm just trying to tell you the new way they're teaching the first grade, stubborn. It's the Dewey Decimal System." Having never questioned Jim's pronouncements, I saw no reason to begin now. The Dewey Decimal System consisted in part of Miss Caroline's waving cards at us on which were printed bee, cat, rat, man, and you. No comment seemed to be expected of us, and the class received these impressionistic revelations in silence. I was bored. So I began a letter to Dill. Miss Caroline caught me writing and told me to tell my father to stop teaching me. "Besides," she said, "we don't write in the first grade, we print. You won't learn to write until you're in the 3rd grade. Calpurnia was to blame for this. It kept me from driving her crazy on rainy days, I guess. She would set me a writing task by scrawling the alphabet firmly across the top of a tablet, then copying out of a chapter out of the Bible beneath. If I reproduced her penmanship satisfactorily, she rewarded me with an open-faced sandwich of bread and butter and sugar. In Calpurnia's teaching, there was no sentimentality. I seldom pleased her, and she seldom rewarded me. "Everybody who goes home to lunch, hold up your hands," said Miss Caroline, breaking into my new grudge against Calpurnia. The town children did so, and she looked us over. "Everybody who brings his lunch, put it on top of his desk." Molasses buckets appeared from nowhere, and the ceiling danced with metallic light. Miss Caroline walked up and down the rows, peering and poking into lunch containers, nodding if the contents pleased her, frowning a little at others. She stopped at Walter Cunningham's desk. "Where's yours?" she asked. Walter Cunningham's face told everybody in the first grade he had hookworms. His absence of shoes told us how he got them. People caught hookworms by going barefooted in barns and hog wallows. And if Walter had owned any shoes, he would have worn them the first day of school, then discarded them till midwinter. He did have a clean shirt on and neatly mended overalls. "Did you forget your lunch this morning?" asked Miss Caroline. Walter looked straight ahead. I saw a muscle jump in his skinny jaw. "Did you forget it this morning?" asked Miss Caroline. Walter's jaw twitched again. "Yeah," he finally mumbled. Miss Caroline went to her desk and opened her purse. "Here's a quarter," she said to Walter. "Go and eat downtown, and you can pay me back tomorrow." Walter shook his head. "No, thank you, ma'am," he drawled softly. Impatience crept into Miss Caroline's voice. "Here, Walter, come get it." Walter shook his head again. When Walter shook his head a third time, someone whispered, "Go on and tell her, Scout." I turned around and saw most of the town people, the entire bus delegation, looking at me. Miss Caroline and I had conferred twice already, and they were looking at me in the innocent assurance that familiarity breeds understanding. I rose graciously on Walter's behalf. Miss Caroline?" "What is it, Jean Louise?" "Miss Caroline, he's a Cunningham." I sat back down. "What, Jean Louise?" I thought I had made things sufficiently clear. It was clear enough to the rest of us. Walter Cunningham was sitting there lying his head off. He didn't forget his lunch. He didn't have any. He had none today, nor would he have any tomorrow, nor the next day. He'd probably never seen 3 quarters together at the same time in his life. I tried again. "Walter's one of the Cunninghams, Miss Caroline." "I beg your pardon, Jean Louise." "That's okay, ma'am. You'll get to know the country folks after a while. Cunninghams never took anything they can't pay back. No church baskets and no script stamps. They never took anything off anybody. They get along on what they have. They don't have much. They get along on it." My special knowledge of the Cunningham tribe, one branch of it, that is, was gained from the events of last winter. Walter's father, one of Atticus's clients, after a dreary conversation in our living room one night about his entailment, before Mr. Cunningham left, he said, "Mr. Finch, I don't know when I'll ever be able to pay you." "Let that be the least of your worries, Walter," Atticus said. When I asked Jim what entailment was, Jim described it as a condition of having your tail in a crack. I asked Atticus if Mr. Cunningham would ever pay us. "Not in money," Atticus said, "but before the year's out, I'll have been paid. You watch." We watched. One morning, Jim and I found a load of stove wood in the backyard. Later, a sack of hickory nuts appeared on the back steps. With Christmas came a crate of smilax and holly. That spring, we found a croaker sack full of turnip greens. Atticus said Mr. Cunningham had more than paid him. "Why does he pay you like that?" I asked. "Because that's the only way he can pay me. He has no money." "Are we poor, Atticus?" Atticus nodded. "We are indeed." Jim's nose wrinkled. "Are we as poor as the Cunninghams?" "Not exactly. The Cunninghams are country folks, farmers, and the crash hit them hardest." Atticus said professional people were poor because the farmers were poor. As Macomb County was farm country, nickels and dimes were hard to come by for doctors and dentists and lawyers. Entailment was only a part of Mr. Cunningham's vexations. The acres not entailed were mortgaged to the hilt, and the little cash he made went to interest. If he held his mouth right, Mr. Cunningham could get a WPA job, but his land would go to ruin if he left it, and he was willing to go hungry to keep his land and vote as he pleased. Mr. Cunningham, said Atticus, came from a set breed of men. As Cunninghams had no money to pay for a lawyer, they simply paid us in what they had. Did you know, said Atticus, that Dr. Reynolds works the same way? He charges folks a bushel of potatoes for a delivery of a baby. Miss Scout, if you give me your attention, I'll tell you what entailment is. Jim's definitions are very nearly accurate sometimes. If I could have explained these things to Miss Caroline, I would have saved myself some inconvenience and Miss Caroline's subsequent mortification, but it was beyond my ability to explain things as well as Atticus, so I said, You're shaming him, Miss Caroline. Walter hasn't got a quarter at home to bring you, and you can't use any stove wood. Miss Caroline stood stock still, then grabbed me by my collar and hauled me to the back of her desk. Jean Louise, I've had about enough of you this morning, she said. You're starting off on the wrong foot in every way, my dear. Hold out your hand. I thought she was going to spit in it, which is the only reason anybody in Macomb held out his hand. It was a time-honored method of sealing oral contracts. Wondering what bargain we made, I turned to the class for an answer, but the class looked back at me in puzzlement. Miss Caroline picked up her ruler and gave me half a dozen quick little pats and told me to stand in the corner. A storm of laughter broke loose when it finally occurred to the class that Miss Caroline had whipped me. When Miss Caroline threatened it with a similar fate, the first grade exploded again, becoming cold sober only when the shadow of Miss Blunt fell over them. Miss Blunt, a native Macomian, as yet uninitiated in the mysteries of the decimal system, appeared at the door, hands on hips, and announced, "If I hear another sound from this room, I'll burn everybody in it. Miss Caroline, the 6th grade cannot concentrate on the pyramids for all this racket." My sojourn in the corner was a short one. Saved by the bell, Miss Caroline watched the class file out for lunch. As I was last to leave, I saw her sink into her chair and bury her head in her arms. Had her conduct been more friendly toward me, I would have felt sorry for her. She was a pretty little thing. And that is chapter 2. Do you guys need notes? Did you get them? Have you get? You need help? Okay. What happens? Page 2021. Beginning of the chapter. What is the beginning of the chapter? Dill left. It's the first day of school. And who's her teacher? Mm-hmm. It's Miss Caroline from Macomb. Where's she from? North Alabama, from Winston County. Page 22, what's the first thing that Scout gets in trouble for?
Reading.
Being able to read. She's not supposed to be able to read, right? She's only in the first grade. And page 24, what's the second thing she gets in trouble for? Mm-hmm. She knows how to write, but it's not just writing. She knows how to write in cursive. So not only does she know how to write, she's not even printing. She's writing in cursive. When are they supposed to learn cursive? The 3rd grade. Scout. Yep. Scout is the name of our narrator. Yes, absolutely. Scout is our narrator. 25 through 26, the embarrassing thing that happens for Miss Caroline is what? Before the 6th grade teacher part, but where she tries to give Walter money. Yeah. Because Walter is Cunningham. Do we recognize that name?
That's major.
Cunningham from chapter 1.
The gamekeeper.
The gang, right? That Boo Radley. So that is a little connection for you. And then what's the flashback about at the end of the chapter? What's the flashback about? Mr. Cunningham uses Atticus as a lawyer to help him. But Mr. Cunningham can't pay. Right? So it talks about all the different ways he pays. So write down some of those ways that he pays him. So write down how he pays him. Is it in money? Right? He pays him in whatever way he can. Pays Atticus.
What was 25 and 26 again?
The thing that happens with Walter Cunningham.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you need the piece of white paper you picked up on your way in the door. If you didn't get one, send somebody to grab some for your table.
I got you.
If you still need to get notes, you can keep getting those. I'm going to go ahead and explain what you're doing on this white piece of paper. We're going to be doing a character sketch. This is a easy way to do a character analysis. Lost my example. Okay. All right, we're going to be doing a character sketch. It's a super simple way to do a character analysis without having to write a short answer response. So do a good job on this so that we can do easy and fun and fluffy things instead of having to write never-ending short answers over the book. Okay, what I'm looking for here is that you know how to find good detail. So you're going to be pulling 3 quotes out of the book. Okay, because that's the kind of stuff that you would want to support a good quality short answer if I asked you to analyze the character. We're going to be looking at Boo Radley, so we're only going to be focused in chapter 1. Okay, so you're going to sketch what the character of Boo Radley, which is Boo his real name? What's his real name?
John.
Not John. What's his real name?
Arthur.
Somebody flip through chapter 1. Starts with an A.
Arthur.
It's Arthur. Arthur is Boo. Okay? So anytime it refers to Arthur or Boo, those are appropriate descriptions. You can use, there's a ton of different descriptions. Some of them are character focused on his personality. Some are events that occur. Some of them are description. Okay? No, never. You know a stick figure is not allowed. Okay, my character analysis is not on Boo. It's on Dill, but it's my example to show you, so you can't cheat. Okay, so here at the top I have Dill. Dill is not his real name, so I have his real name here at the bottom. Charles Baker Harris. So I encourage you, when you're labeling, make sure that you have Arthur, but also that you have Boo. Okay, it's a little hard to see in the thing, so I'm just showing you a picture. So I have 3 quotes here on the side, and I have quotation marks around them because they come directly from the text, and I have the page number. Okay, so I have, he wore blue linen shorts that buttoned to his shirt. So that's about his appearance. And if you look in my little drawing there, I drew 2 big old buttons, buttoning his shirt to his shorts. Okay, so I tried to make my drawing match the description. Second one I have is that he habitually pulled at a cowlick in the center of his forehead. So when I drew his hair, I tried to draw it where it was like 2 sides, so that he was, you know, as if he'd been pulling at it. Okay. And I remembered, even though I don't have it as one of my quotes, they said he was blonde, so I tried to make it match. And then the last one is not about the way he looks. It says, there he would stand, his arm around the fat pole, staring and wondering. So I drew the light pole, and he's standing on the sidewalk, and he's standing there. So that's more about his characterization than the way he looks. It's something that he does. So what you're going to do is your character sketch is going to be on Boo Radley. Make 3 quotes with page numbers. Okay, and the picture that you create that cannot be a stick figure is going to go with those. It could be about an event. There's several stories about all the crazy things he does. You could show him freezing the azaleas. You could show him eating squirrels. You could show him stabbing Dad with a pair of scissors. There's all different things. At one point, Jen describes him as 6.5 feet tall. Now, do we know are these things all true? What do we think? All true? No, we obviously know they're not true, but this is the way that the kids, right, Jim and Dill and Scout all see Boo in chapter 1. So that's what we're doing. Character sketch. You have about 12 minutes, 10 minutes now. I had people finish it last period in 10 minutes. But if not, you can take it home and turn it in first thing tomorrow. Sweet, sweet.